Well, that little buzz was just to wake you all up. And if you all look behind you in the corner up there, I think it was Marcus. Just so you all know. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all here this morning. It's good to see your happy, smiling faces, and it's good to see some visiting people and guests with us. And it's wonderful to be able to meet you and for you to come and worship with us. We hope you're blessed by this morning. A couple of small announcements. Adventurers for our children. We had adventurers running this afternoon, and I believe it's not in the bulletin. I think it's 2 o'clock. Coming to see how you go. 2 o'clock is for adventurers. Our speaker today is our local pastor, Brother Daniel Munn. He'll be sharing the word with us this morning. But you're going to see him a bit earlier because he's going to come up and he's got a couple of announcements that he wants to share with us as well. And so I'll just invite Daniel up. Brother Darren, our leading elder, thank you for your faithful leadership. I don't know if you noticed, but he's been leading out the last 3 weeks. So I think it's time we have a break, a rest. So there's 2 announcements that we need to share. The first one is about the Bible Expo, which is next week during Sabbath school time. So there's a couple of Seventh-day Adventist pastors here from within this conference. I actually know both of them personally, and they have come by a collection of old and unusual Bibles. Someone's given it to them. And they're going from church to church and showing them. And the idea is that you can invite your friends, you can invite people to come and to see these unusual Bibles, and they're going to talk about some stories of the Reformation and different things. It's a visitors event. So please, if you have a friend, especially someone who is interested in the Bible, invite them next week. It's Sabbath school time, so there's absolutely no reason not to be there. If one of the classes wants to run Sabbath school as usual, I don't mind, but they'll be there available in the hall. Kids will be there too. We're going to have lots of fun. So that's the Bible Expo. You can see more details in the bulletin, which you can get online or in hard copy there at the back, I believe. The other one is related to church lunch. I think people are still a little bit confused about how that's working. What we're trying at the moment is that if you're a visitor, if you come here and you're not prepared at all, you're not aware of what's going on, come over to the hall after church, share lunch with us. We will provide some food for you. If you're not a visitor, please try to bring your own food, so that way we're not spending lots and lots of money trying to make food for everybody. I reckon today is probably visitors almost half. But anyway, you're all welcome to come. We have got a bit of food, and we'll be very happy to share it together, talk together, have some fellowship. That's the purpose of it. And if you're a member, try to bring food so that you can come and you can be part of it too. We want you to. Okay.
You know, the Bible says there's power in prayer, isn't it? And that power is available to all of us. And individually, I'm sure we'll pray each week. And if you look in your bulletin, whether you receive it digitally or on paper format, you'll see a list in there that unfortunately is getting longer and longer. And we need the power of prayer, don't we? Pray for our friends, our church family. And so I encourage you in your prayer time each week that you take time to acknowledge that list in the bulletin and remember those people and pray for each one of them specifically, purposefully. And this morning as I pray, I won't mention them individually, but as a group, but I'd encourage you to remember them this week as you pray. If you can kneel, please kneel. If you like to bow, please do so. Let us pray. Our Lord Father, firstly, we just want to acknowledge you, acknowledge your greatness, acknowledge your mighty and your majesty, acknowledge what you have done for us. Lord, you've done everything. You have paid the ultimate price. You've died for us. May we be mindful of that. May we be thankful that each and every moment of our lives, Lord, that you have given us hope, you have given us a future. Without you, there is nothing, Lord. And so we thank you for that. We thank you that as big and as mighty and as precious you are, that you still encourage us to approach you. Lord, may we also do that. May we know that there is no hope without you. Jesus, we thank you for your blessings. We thank you for this safe little part of the world which we live in. Lord, even as we see it is also tainted by sin, Lord, we recognise there is so much hurt in this world. We thank you for where we are. Lord, we thank you for our health. We thank you for the food, the water, the supplies you give us each and every day. Lord, this morning I want to pray for those who are listening, Lord. People who aren't well, who are sick, who are missing from this church, Lord, because they can't get here. Father, we want to remember them this morning, Lord. We pray that you would heal them. We pray that you would let them know that we are thinking of that you care for them. We care. Jesus, in all that we do, may we glorify your name. May we be a light to this community. May we be a light to our work colleagues, to our school, to our family, wherever we are. May your light shine for us, and we may be that. I pray this morning that we receive a blessing from your word as it is spoken by Dan, that we may come away feeling blessed, feeling the joy of knowing you. Lord, in all that we do, may we represent you. I know we are a poor representation of who you are, but Lord, help us to do our best. Guide us. May we follow your will, Lord. And Lord, in all things I pray that your name will be glorified. We look forward to that great day of your return. Thank you for that hope, Lord. And as a church, may we continue to move forward, may we continue to grow and to spread your word as best we can. And I ask all these things in the wonderful, holy name. I'd just like to invite our deacons if they can come forth and collect our offering, which today is the local church offering. Thank you. Let us pray. Our Lord, Father, we pray for a blessing on these tithing offerings that they've been faithfully returned to this morning, Lord. We pray that this small amount of payment be put to mighty use. And Lord, we pray all these things in your loving name.
Oh, we have some children. Let's go on because there's some more children. Let's see. Do you come in? Has a story? No? Oh, nothing. All right. Now, are you all comfortable? Good. When I was a little girl, I loved Uncle Arthur's bedtime stories. Do you know those? You do? Good. Alright, now Uncle Arthur, he told lots and lots and lots of stories. He wrote them in a book, in lots and lots of books. And one of those stories is called The 7-Minute Garden. Now, Karen got me a lovely pictures up there. Karen, look at that garden. Isn't that beautiful? You got a garden like that at home? Oh, I have a little. And I think Karen had another lovely garden to look at. See this? Oh, look at those beautiful flowers. Is there one more? Wow, that's a beautiful garden, isn't it? Now, do you think anybody could make a big, beautiful garden like that in 7 minutes? Yeah, they could or couldn't? What do you think?
I think my mum could.
Mum could make that in 7 minutes. Wow, she's very good. Mum, you have all that little voice confidence there. Now, the story starts with a train driver. I think we've got a picture of a train too. Your mum found that one herself. There it is, a train. The train driver, this particular train driver, he drove his train way out in the country on a train track. A very long way. And at a particular spot, he had to stop and wait for 7 minutes. You know why? Because another train coming from the opposite direction had to pass across his train track and go on a different track, a different direction. Now, if he didn't stop, they both be on the same track. What would happen?
Train crash.
Train crash, you're right. So, it was very important to stop and wait for how long? How long was it?
7 minutes.
Yep, 7 minutes, you're right. So, every day this happened. Every single day. At that spot, you had to stop, the train crosses across, and on its way over the train, and that happened every day. One day, the train driver thought, oh, 7 minutes doing nothing. I wonder if I could do something special. My job as a train driver is sitting all the time. I wonder if I could hop out of the train and do something outside of the train and get some exercise. And then he had an idea. He thought, oh, I think I could make a garden. I think you could make a garden in 7 minutes and have it all finished. No, he couldn't do that. So, the next day, he brought a spade on the train with him and maybe a pick of some other garden tools. He hopped out of the train and he started digging. And then quickly watched the clock because he had to quickly get back in the train and start up again. Once the other train passed across his track and went its way, he had to go and he continued on his train driving. And every day did this, and the people that were passengers on the train, they saw him. They saw him popping out of the train, digging a bit in the dirt, and they thought it was a bit strange. Maybe some of them thought it was a bit crazy. But he did that every day. And weeks passed, and months passed, and even years passed. And what do you think was happening? What, David?
Making progress.
Was that?
Making progress.
I didn't get that. Making what?
Progress.
Progress.
Oh, progress. Oh, yes, in making progress. That's a really good word too. Yes, he was making progress. And maybe we heard that. We heard it. He was making progress. You look at that program, just started, and we thought it was just tiny little honey, just started flowers, it just around us. And then it started to grow, and after the years, of course it's years now, it was getting very beautiful. There were trees, there were trees, there were roses, there were all sorts of wonderful things. That's not the garden, that's just another somebody else. But it was still very beautiful. And it actually became famous. People were telling other people all about it. And even in the newspaper, there was a story about the pictures in the newspaper. And people from far away would come and make a special train trip to come and have a look, or might come and have a look at the 7-minute garden. And in the paper, it was wonderful, showing pictures of the train from the next garden. And this driver, how this driver had created something beautiful in just a small amount of time. Something so beautiful for everybody to admire and enjoy. Now, I wonder if we could learn something from that story. Jill, have you learned? No? David, what do you have an idea? Could we learn something from that story?
Yeah.
See with any guys. What do you think we could learn from that story?
Maybe you can learn about nature.
Yes, that is good because flowers and trees are nature. That's right. Anybody else? Can you come and tell us? Can we sit up here and come to the microphone? What do you think you can learn? Microphone close to me.
Maybe
Not sure. Maybe we could learn to do some. Do you think we could learn to make a garden? We could learn about a garden, that could we? But you have to make a garden. Generally, you can learn to do that. Sure, you can do that. Maybe you can do not to waste this time. It's like 7 minutes. Yeah, just like in about 7 minutes, we can do some things. And what about I've got a really good idea for children. We could use a little bit of time. If you're cleaning up your bedroom, have you got a bedroom for yourself?
I think
You sleep with your dad. Oh, you're lucky.
but Grandma did never fall asleep.
Oh, when you're sleeping home, okay. Well, sometimes you'll even get in the nest sometimes. Always, oh, one of the always find us to the everyone gets this. So we could do a little bit of time. If it's a big mess, we can start in a little project, just do a little cleaning and keep going and going, and after a while it gets all lovely, tidy, beautiful. Yes, David?
My dad came with the picture.
Oh, he's a nice baby, very good. And maybe we could help our mum or our dad. Some things are very hard to do, aren't they? You think so? Sometimes school assignments are hard. You think that too? Yeah, okay. Sometimes some things are hard, but we don't have to do it all at once. We can just do a little bit and a little bit more and a little bit more. And after a long time, it gets all done. Did you catch that? Well, that's the story of the 7-minute time that I heard or think I read it when I was a little girl. Yes, David?
Well, maybe we can start doing free chores one day. Maybe we can start doing free chores one day.
So many grown-up people, sometimes they go, she's a little messy, just a little bit more difficult, and it all gets done. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Heather. What a great example of the power of habits. Someone preaching that today. That's definitely worth taking into account. We got a bit of feedback from the two mics. You can turn this on. Yeah, you do something every day, even just for a few minutes. There's no telling how much it will add up to before you know it. And so make it a good thing. Make it something beautiful. That's right. Hopefully we can live with that. Now, have any of you ever laid a fleece before? Laid a fleece? You ever laid a fleece before? Well, let me put it to you a different way. Have you ever tried to tell the future before? You tried to predict the future. You probably have, maybe just not the long-term future. Maybe you're driving along and you're trying to work out whether that car is going to hit you before you can turn into the road, or whatever, right? We're always trying to project into the future to plan for the present. There's a fellow that you might have heard of, his name was Gideon. And he was one of these people. I relate a lot to Gideon. In fact, I once laid a fleece. And what I used was not a literal fleece, I didn't have one of those. I used a handkerchief. My parents were thinking about sending me to a Christian school, which I'd never done before. I'd always gone to a public school. And I wasn't sure. They sort of left it up to me to decide if I wanted to go. And so I thought, oh, well, how am I supposed to decide? I have no idea. I have no idea whether this will be a good thing or whether this will be, necessary. It might cost my parents a bit more money, so I don't want it to be all wasted. And so I got a handkerchief. It wasn't this one. This was some years ago now, as you may guess. And I laid it down on the ground one night. And I prayed and said to God, look, if you want me to go, just make the ground wet, but the hanky dry. What Gideon said, right? So the next morning, what do you think? Well, the ground was wet with dew, but the handkerchief was dry. I thought, wow, that's pretty remarkable. I almost didn't expect that, but thanks, God. But maybe, God, you can do it because, maybe the sun just dried out the hanky before it dried the grass. You feel that? Is that possible? So the next night, I laid out the hanky again. I said, God, this time, if you want me to go, then make the hanky wet, but the grass dry. And the next morning, yeah, it happened. And so I thought, all right, I'm going off to this school. And it was a good decision. It was a good school. I gained a lot of benefit from going there. And so ever after, I've always, anytime I have to make a hard decision, I've always done it. Actually, I've never done it again. Never done it again. And part of the reason for that was because there is other places in the Bible, as sometimes Jesus says, don't look for a sign. And in many decisions in our lives, we shouldn't be waiting for a sign. And this brings us to a fellow called Gideon. And let me just tell you a little bit about the world as Gideon knew it. We're going to go to the book of Judges, Judges chapter 3, and start in verse 7. Judges chapter 3 and verse 7. Judges being the 7th book of the Bible, 7th book of the Old Testament. So the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and Asherahs. Therefore the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia. And the children of Israel served Cushan-Rishathaim 8 years. When the children of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the children of Israel, who delivered them, Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel. He went out to war, and the Lord delivered Cushan-Rishathaim, king of Mesopotamia, into his hands, and his hand prevailed over Cushan-Rishathaim. So the land had rest 40 days. Then Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. And the children of Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord strengthened Eglon, king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done evil in the sight of the Lord. Can we predict the future? In this short passage of Scripture, can you predict what's going to happen next? What do you think? Well, I'll tell you, God is going to raise up another hero, right? And this new hero, or judge as they called in the Bible, because they also judge disputes between people, but we probably call him a hero. These heroes, this hero would rescue Israel once again from the oppression, from the persecutor. And can we predict the future even further? What do you think happened next? Israel, once again, turned away from God after this hero had died and began to rebel against God once again. And so what happened? Can we predict the future? What happened next? Well, God sent another persecutor, didn't he? Another oppressor to punish his people. Well, maybe we don't like to think of it that way. But anyway, the oppressor came, whether God sent them or not. And what happened next? Maybe we can predict the future a little bit. Maybe when something is happening a certain way, it has a certain result. And when you do it again, it has that result again. Have you ever tried that? No? You go to your car, turn it on, it goes. The next day, you go to your car, you turn it on, it goes, right? Sometimes it doesn't go, and then you get really worried, right? But normally, we see patterns. The sun rises, the sun sets, the sun rises, the sun sets. So there are some things we can predict, and these are things that sometimes people call cycles, but they're not really cycles. They're just patterns. They're just things that keep on happening over and over again. Now, the hero that God called next was Gideon. And let me read to you in Judges chapter 6, verse 11 and onwards. I'll read to you how Gideon felt about the situation. Now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth tree, which was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, while his son Gideon threshed wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. This was the new oppressor. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said to him, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor." How'd you like that to be said by an angel to you? You mighty man of valor, you mighty woman of valor. Make you feel pretty good. How does Gideon feel about it? Verse 13. Gideon said to him, "Oh my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, did not the Lord bring us up from Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hands of the Midianites." Gideon doesn't seem to believe what the angel says, does he? I'm not a mighty man of valor. In fact, I'm not even sure I'm a man of God. God isn't with us anymore. Now, back in the old days, let me tell you about that. Back in the old days, God used to be with us. How do we know he was with us? How do we know? We saw miracles. Yeah. God's presence was visible to us. He led us through the wilderness. Our fathers told us all about it. But now, no one believes in miracles these days. Miracles don't happen these days. That's what Gideon is saying, right? Now, it's all very well for us looking back at Gideon to say, oh, you silly Gideon, miracles don't happen these days. Huh. You don't even know the miracles God's still going to do in the future. You think that you've reached the end of the world. You think you've reached the end of God's tolerance with humanity, God's work with humanity. You think that God has nothing left to do in this earth. God has no more miracles to work. Well, we laugh at Gideon. Ha, silly Gideon. So many miracles still yet to come. He doesn't know nothing yet. And we do the same thing as Gideon. God isn't doing any miracles these days. Miracles are a thing of the past. Miracles are something that God did in the past, but they don't happen now. God used to be with us as a church, but he's not anymore. God has left us because we don't see miracles. We don't see the wonderful stories of the past happening today. We do the same as Gideon. And how does God respond to Gideon? How does the angel respond? Then the Lord turned to him and said, go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you? God doesn't rebuke Gideon for his lack of faith. God doesn't say to Gideon, you silly man, you don't know nothing. I can still do miracles. I'm powerful enough. No, he simply says, just go in the might that I've already given you. He already said, you're a mighty man of valor. Have not I sent you? Gideon's determined. He says, oh my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh. And maybe he didn't say it, but Manasseh is probably the weakest in Israel. And I am the least in my father's house. And the Lord said to him, surely I'll be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites as one man. And then he lays out the fleece, and many of us know the story. But I want you to think about that. God says to him, just go. I've given you the mission. I've given you the power. Now don't think that you don't have the ability to do it. Just because I apparently don't work miracles anymore. Now we're going to come back to that story in a moment, but I want to talk to you a little bit about another history lesson. Because Gideon was predicting the future based on the history that he knew, based on the understanding that he had, right? His understanding was, back in the old days, God led us out of Egypt. And our fathers have told us the story many, many times about how God did wonderful, mighty miracles. But ever since then, over the last 200 years or so, no, all we've seen since then is just battles and killing and murdering, horrible stuff. God hasn't done anything. Occasionally someone rose up and they helped to lead us to the battle, but, it was hardly miraculous. It was just lucky, just lucky that we ended up surviving as a people. That's the history Gideon knew. What about us? As we come to the 21st century, as is begun, actually, what is the history that we know? We could go back to 1440. What's this machine? Can anyone tell me? The Gutenberg printing press, invented in 1440. A revolution in communication. What do I mean by a revolution in communication? There's a myth that people who lived in the so-called Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, couldn't read and write. They were illiterate. And it's true that only a very few were literate by the standard of the day. But you know, our standard of literacy is much lower than theirs was. For them, to be literate, you not only had to speak and read your own language, you had to be able to speak and read Latin as well, or at least Greek. So all these illiterate peasants who knew nothing, couldn't read the Bible. Why not? It wasn't because they couldn't read. It was because the Bible was not available to them. It was just physically not available. They couldn't just go down to the shop and buy a nice Bible and go home and read it. We like to say that books were chained up in monasteries, and that's true. But it wasn't just because the church wanted to keep the Bible to themselves so they could be the only ones to read it. It was also because books were so expensive that it was like, you know, you chain your bike to the post because you don't want someone to steal it. But then the printing press was invented. And what did that mean? It meant a revolution. No longer did you have to write every single word of the Bible every single time you wanted to make a copy. Have you ever tried doing that? I tried when I was learning Hebrew. I did it at Psalm 119 or something. It took me I don't think I finished. It took me a very long time. Handwriting is so slow, especially if you want someone else to be able to read it, right? But the printing press, now all of a sudden you just do a little mechanical work and you can boom, print a whole page of text and boom, print another whole page, boom, another whole page. And before you know it, books became available to everybody. And because people could actually read, people bought them. At first, of course, it was those who had the most money, you know, the knights and the merchants, but gradually more and more people were buying books. And you saw the appearance of storybooks, all sorts of things, way back, as soon as the printing press was invented. Now, the funny thing was about this, not everyone was very excited about this invention. Isn't that strange? Wouldn't you think everyone would be very pleased that someone had invented something to make it easier for people to read the Bible and to read different books and to know more things? No, the funny thing is it was actually the exception rather than the rule where people didn't get rid of these things. Because, of course, once you have an informed and educated public, people begin to ask questions about why things are being done the way they're being done. Why does he get to make all the decisions about what goes on around here? This book talks about a time when the king didn't make all the decisions. I want that time now as well. I don't want the Pope to make all the decisions for me. I don't want the Pope to tell me what to think. I can read my Bible too, and my Bible says something different. And so, across the world, printing presses, which existed in different places, were abolished. They were destroyed. It wasn't just in Roman Catholic Europe, it was also Islamic Middle East, North Africa, also in China. They had printing presses before Europe did, but they were banned. They were abolished. We don't want those peasants to be able to know anything that we don't tell them. But there were just a few places where the printing press was tolerated. Germany, Holland, the United Kingdom, England. And so it was that people in those areas began to read, and things began to change, and things were not always very comfortable, especially for the king who had his head cut off. But, yeah, it turned out well for them, and in the end, they got to another technological revolution. And it was a revolution in transportation. 1804, the invention of the steam train. The British, because they had decided that you were allowed to become educated as an ordinary person, a man called Stephenson, he invented the steam train. And they were able to use this train to go from place to place very quickly, move heavy loads from place to place. They were able to colonize new places. Many of the people living there weren't very appreciative of that because they weren't always very nice. But they got this technology that they're able to use. And they used it for good, and they used it for evil. But one thing is for certain, it brought a lot of change in the world. And all the countries that didn't accept that technology quickly realized that they had to catch up, they had to copy it, because the world was changing. And there was nothing they could do about it. Now, I'll tell you what, when steam trains were invented, they were not popular, especially not with the nobles, the aristocracy of England. They were quite concerned that these steam trains would turn the milk sour. All the cows, when we milked the cow, the milk would come out sour because they were scared of the trains. They were also worried that the soot would cover everything and everything would become black. Now, once again, we can laugh at that because that didn't happen. And yet there's always opposition. There's always a good reason, and sometimes it is a good reason why we don't want change, why we don't want something new. But the lesson that I'm starting to get here is that it will change, whether we like it or not. The question is whether we are going to benefit from it or whether we are simply going to suffer because of it. Are we going to be using the technology or are we going to be on the receiving end of it? And interestingly, when I think about the church has always adopted new technology. The church adopted the printing press, at least the Protestant part did. And the church adopted steam travel and used steam trains to spread the gospel, right? Across the countryside, people like Whitfield and Wesley traveled all through the United States, and steam boats took them across the oceans, all through the continents, from continent to continent. With the help of the steam train, the gospel was able to spread. What came next? Well, if you combine communication and transportation, you get telecommunication. Some bright sparks put together the concepts that we developed in transportation and the concepts of communication to make satellites, something that you have to actually launch into space in order to communicate with the whole world. Radios, the internet, all these things. And there was a revolution. 1958, first satellite. There was a revolution in telecommunication. Did the church use that? Now, many churches didn't really. Many churches are only just now beginning to utilize radio, internet, satellite television. But our church was one of the first. We used the printing press when it was first developed. We used steam trains when they came into the United States to help this growing church to stay together. And we used, HMS Richards to Mark Finley. We used internet, satellites, radio. But what came next after telecommunication? I'll tell you what came next. Saturation. We are so sick of telecommunication. So I don't know if that's a revolution, but Zoom, a company founded in 2011, very recently, well, 11 years ago, but it's become so big, right? And now every church has a Zoom account. And now we've even had church on the internet, we've had church on Zoom, we have Bible studies, we have prayer meetings on Zoom. And sometimes we get a little bit sick of it. And so when we look at the 21st century and we try to say, what's coming next? Are we going to still be meeting here in a building? Or are all the churches going to be on the internet? I'll tell you one thing that I found. When we had to not be in here and we were just having church on the internet, I don't know about you, and I suspect maybe you feel the same way. Maybe that's why you're here today. I missed meeting in person. I miss interacting personally. Now, we can't escape the technological revolutions of the world. But we also have to keep a balance. Just because the printing press was invented and people could all now read, did that stop people from preaching sermons? Because up to that point, the whole purpose for sermons was to tell the congregation what only the priest or the pastor knew, because he was the only one that could read Latin. He was the only one that could read the Bible. When steam trains were invented, did that stop people from having families and living in the same place long term and settling down and having friends? And did they just all buzz around the world all the time? Of course not. When telecommunications and satellite and the internet was invented, does that mean that we as a society now should forget about the things that have kept us together for thousands of years? And yet things will change. Things have to change. We have so much more ability to travel from place to place. And so here as a, I guess you could say small, maybe not once small, but now small country church, it's not easy for us. People leave. Kids grow up, they go somewhere else to work. That's just the way it is now. We can't change that. We can, I don't know, try to lock our kids up in a room or something and stop them from escaping, but that never seems to work. And so we're faced with this challenge. Come 2030, what's going to be left of this church? Is it going to just be an empty building? Are we going to be all online? Will there be any of us even left at all? It's not an easy thing. It's a challenge. While we're talking about this, and before I take you to the rest of Gideon's story, I want to reflect on two lists. And they're lists that I've been reflecting on, just thinking about. And these lists are a challenge to us. They're not necessarily a complete answer to this question that I'm posing about what the future holds, but in the background, about everything I've been saying about history, there's been something else going on as well. Ever since the printing press, people began to doubt authority. Ever since the steam train, people have been able to go from place to place and see how people do things differently. Ever since satellites and the internet, people have been able to see whatever they want, whenever they want. And yeah, some people, even when we're allowed to come back to church to meet, choose not to. They prefer just to watch. Maybe watch us, or maybe watch something else. And so there's been this change through history because of the technology. There's been a change. People are now more motivated by what's in it for me? What do I get out of this? How does this benefit? Rather than, is this something that I need for survival? Because in the past, you needed your community to survive. If you didn't have a place, not only did you feel lonely, that loneliness was expressing something very important, and that was high chance of death. If I am socially isolated in most of history, I'm not going to live much longer. Yet today, we can be almost as socially isolated as we want. We can live just as an individual, as an atom, all on our own. I'm perfectly very well, thank you very much. I don't need you. I don't need him. I don't need him. And yet as a church, we're supposed to be together as a family. How can we be a family when the world is telling us you're an individual? How can we rely on each other when the world is telling us you don't need anyone else? If you feel lonely, find a group of people that you can enjoy hanging around. But if you don't like them, or if you don't feel accepted, just move on and find a different group. Isn't that what society tells us? It's not just society. When I say society, I'm not just saying them out there. I'm saying it's our reality that we live in. We have so little reason to forgive. We have so little reason to get past challenges. If someone is mean to me, why should I forgive? It doesn't affect me. I can live my life. I can do my job. I can get my paycheck, my Centrelink check, whatever. And so we have two very different worlds. Two very different worlds. And one of these worlds is very much, let me show you this list. What world is this? Look at this list. I'll read through it. Drinking, smoking, injecting, gambling, piercing, tattooing, and of course it all ends in dying. No, not that kind of dying, the other kind of dying, right? Drinking, stuff that isn't good for your body, right? Smoking, anything is probably not, even if it's gum leaves, right? Probably not good for your body. Injecting, well, some medicines can be injected, but sometimes people use things that aren't medicines, right? Gambling, gaming as they call it, playing a game, it's just a game. Well, you end up having no money and you end up having to steal. It's not quite a game anymore, is it? Piercing, tattooing, dyeing your hair all sorts of different colours, purple, pink. If it's redder than mine, it's probably dyed, right? Now think about that list. We don't like those things. Yeah, do we? I mean, I don't think there's anything on that list that our members here would be happy to see everyone, for all of us to see them do. But what about the rest of society? What is the view of the rest of society about this? It's perfectly fine. Now you might say, no, Daniel, you're wrong. Injecting drugs is still illegal. Really? Is that why they feel safe injecting them? It might still technically be illegal for now, but it's not everywhere. Not anymore. Pretty soon you'll be allowed to inject yourself with whatever, as long as it's what? Not hurting anyone else. You notice something about these? None of these things are hurting anybody else. And so the world tells us, in that case, they're perfectly fine. Now, once upon a time, though, something else these all have in common, I think, maybe with the exception of, no, all of these things, just, 40, 50 years ago, were looked down on by society. Maybe smoking, it's more looked down on today than it was in the past. But in general, these things are seen as being distasteful. So it's not just us as a church that dislike these things, it's actually all of society. What's the difference, right? Society tolerates these things. It says, that's okay, it's not a big deal. We as a church condemn it. Now let me show you another list. Condemning, littering, slandering, exploiting, bullying, manipulating, and abusing. Now, speaking of us condemning that other list, what is this list? What is this list? And don't worry, I'm not about to say it's the sins that we commit. Well, that may be true, but that's not the list. The list is the sins that our society, our world condemns. You reckon that's true? Now, I put littering in there, although I don't think many people really say littering is a sin, but I think most people would feel a bit uncomfortable being on camera doing it, right? Most people out there in society, they may not be a Christian, but if someone sees them littering, they'd be a bit embarrassed. And I also felt that I had to include it because people talk so much about the environment, and yet littering is probably the only thing that we personally do to damage the environment. So I think if people thought about it hard enough, littering would definitely be on. How do we as a church feel about these things? The ones that society hates, despises, does not tolerate. Well, look, we don't support them. We find them distasteful, but we don't really condemn them, do we? So do you see a little bit of a problem? The problem is, there's two worlds. There's the world out there, and there's the world in here. And in here, a list of, well, we can call them sins, maybe, offences, which society says, they're okay. We condemn them. We absolutely oppose them. And do I do any of these things? No. Do I want to? No. Do I encourage you to do any of these things? No, of course not. But what about the other list? How strongly do we feel about those things? And I'm not about to say that we should go around becoming like some churches and take our moral cues from the world. I won't name any names. I'm not about to say that we go around and we preach against littering every Sabbath, or preach against global warming, or preach against, you name it, right? Preach against asylum seeker concentration camps, whatever you want to call it, whatever they're called. Anyway, some people preach against those, right? Why? Because that's what the world is preaching against. That's what the world dislikes. I'm not suggesting that we do that. But I do think that in this world that we live in, and going forward in the 21st century, what can we afford to ignore? What can we afford to wink at? If you had to pick one of those two lists to say, we're going to let this slide, which list would it be? If you had to have one of those groups of people, so people that do one of those two things, which group would it be? If you had to have those people come into our church and listen to our sermons and be a part of our Bible studies, would you want to have people who slander, bully, manipulate, abuse, people who condemn others without giving them the time to understand, people who don't care about littering and destroying our property and our environment? Or would you prefer to have people who drink? Would you prefer to have people who smoke come into our church? Would you prefer to have people who inject themselves with things that are not mandated by the government? Would you prefer to have people who have frittered away all their money gambling come into our church? Would you prefer to have someone who has a piercing? Maybe on their ears, maybe that's tolerable, I don't know, but what about if it's on their tongue, their nose, and their eyebrow? Would you feel that person didn't belong here? Tattoos? Do they have to get them scrubbed off somehow before they can come into church? Dyed hair? Hair redder than mine? I won't tolerate anyone who can beat for red hair. I think, I'm not going to ask you to shout it out, but I think, like me, you would rather see that here in this church. Not because we think those are good things, not because we're lowering our standards, far be it from me to lower any standards, but because those people, just like you and me, need Jesus. Now, what about the other group? Do we want them to come to church too? Yes, we do, of course. But do we want them to come to church and to feel that they're comfortable as they are? Because I can tell you, no doubt, the person who has pierced nose, pierced eyebrows, pierced ears, pierced toes, whatever, I don't know what it is, that person will not feel comfortable when they come to church. Because I don't have those things, and you don't. And they'll pretty quickly realize that one of these things is not like the others. So we can try to make them comfortable, we can try to greet them, we can try to say hello, we can try to be friendly with them. But guaranteed, they won't be comfortable. But what about the other group? Are they comfortable? Is this their territory? Is this their world? A world where abuse is tolerated, where it's forgiven, of course. We understand that it's not good, but we forgive it. Just like we forgive having a drink. They're really the same, aren't they? Are these two lists the same, do you think? Are they both equally bad? Is getting a piercing the same as abusing someone? What do you think? Obviously, all sin is sin, right? Jesus died for it all. You know, I had a dream last night. I don't know why. I was at a funeral and I had no shirt on. I don't want you to imagine that. But I did feel a bit uncomfortable. I won't say whose funeral it was. It was none of yours. And then someone gave me a white shirt. I made sure I wore a white shirt. And it just reminded me, Jesus' righteousness is that white covering. It's that white shirt. And Gideon, in the power that God gave him, you know what? God didn't do a miracle. He didn't. Not really. There's nothing supernatural. Gideon just did what God said, and a miracle happened. It wasn't supernatural, but it was a miracle. What are we waiting for before we act? Are we waiting for God to do something supernatural? Are we wanting to put out a fleece? Well, if you want to put out a fleece, by all means do it. It can work, I know that. Whatever it takes, that's what it took for Gideon. Whatever it takes for you, Jesus has already given you that robe of righteousness. If you've accepted it. Now we're going to pray in just a moment, and I'm going to pray that Jesus gives us that robe of righteousness. But when I pray that, if you're praying that with me, I ask you, I beg you, please don't wait for anything more. Start living the life that Jesus has you to live. Start coming to Him, and even if it's 7 minutes every day. I like that story. So I told you it wasn't related to my sermon, but it is. 7 minutes every day. Just spend that time with Jesus. If you do it every single day, it will make a difference. Is that victory? Is that righteousness? Is that white shirt something that you want? I'm going to pray for you, but first I want you to signal to God, to yourself, and to me if that's something you want by raising your hand. Do you want that? Let's pray. Our Father in heaven, Lord, our righteousness is as filthy rags. Lord, we have some good standards. We do some good things. And yet, before you, we are naked. Before you, we are ashamed. We know that there are sins in our lives that we don't have the power to get rid of. Some of them may hurt others, some of them may hurt only ourselves. But Lord, I pray, especially for those who raise their hands, that you would give us your robe of righteousness, that you would give us your pure character, that you might give us the will, the motivation which we lack, the faith which we lack, that every day we might commune with you and you might guide us to do great things, things that we never thought of, things that we didn't believe possible. And may you do it not for our glory, but for yours, I pray. In Jesus' name. Let's sing our final hymn.